The stadium breathes like a living thing, a low electric hum that spins through the stands and settles in the throat. Night air tastes of wet rubber and metal, and under the floodlights the track is an obsidian ribbon, wet with the ghosts of other races. Somewhere beyond the curve, a lone speaker crackles and anthems blur into the static of tens of thousands of anticipatory heartbeats. In that charged silence, a single figure stands bent at the line, shoes dug into clay as if to anchor memory itself. He inhales, slow and deliberate, feeling the world narrow to the rhythm of his own pulse. This is the place where histories are made, and where small, stubborn people refuse to be ordinary. This is the corridor where Jürgen Straub learned to turn doubt into pace, pain into strategy, and a simple stride into a story that would outlive him. Born into the measured rhythms of a country that prized discipline and quiet excellence, Straub's life would at times feel like a study in contrasts, the tenderness of a childhood in small towns and the iron-handed precision of elite sport, the intimate laughter of family kitchens and the public incandescent glare of Olympic arenas. He grew up with the ache of wanting more, not the loud, covetous kind, but a persistent tug that whispered, "What if?" That question followed him onto the cinder tracks and into lonely hotel rooms, through seasons of injury and reinvention, through breakfasts of porridge and late-night maps marked with routes and splits. It would push him to perfect the small things, the cadence of breathing down the back straight, the micro-adjustment of foot strike on a damp turn, the way to hold a gaze that says, "I know where this is going." This story will walk you through the mud and sunlight of his upbringing, the rituals that shaped his days, the friendships and rivalries that sharpened him. It will take you into the gym where weights clanged like a metronome, to the forests where intervals were whispered into pine, and breath became prayer, and into the studios where he quietly learned the discipline of mental rehearsal. You will hear imagined conversations, the terse coaching advice in a damp rain, the private pep talks that sounded more like promises than plans. You will travel with him through setbacks that were almost destructive, the stress fractures that made him question his body, the political storms that turned stadiums into theaters of ideology, the nights when the only light came from a bedside lamp and a single hopeful training log. And then you will witness the breakthroughs, that particular race when everything aligned, when timing, courage, and a daring kick produced a moment so pure it felt like an answer. But beyond the track, there was a man who loved simple pleasures, the hush of snow on an early run, the smell of coffee brewed slow at dawn, the stubborn affection for classical music that accompanied his cool-downs. He read, he fixed radios in winter afternoons, he learned to listen, really listen, to the cadence of footsteps and the stories they told. He was not a myth born whole. He was a craft built over years of repetition and refusal. This narrative will not only celebrate medals and times, it will linger on the human fragments, the letters exchanged with an old friend, the whispered apology after a lost final, the small private rituals before every race. It will paint the roar of the crowd as contrast to the inner quiet that permitted greatness, a paradox where outward spectacle met inward discipline. What follows is an immersive journey in cinematic detail. The stones of country roads underfoot, the metallic smell of starting blocks, the chorus of coaches at the edge of lanes. It is an account of training routines punctuated by stubborn creativity, of setbacks that forced reinvention, and of a singular achievement that became an emblem, not just of a race won or lost, but of character revealed. We will walk with Jürgen through seasons of doubt and days of triumph, and by the end you will understand that his story is not only about a lap timed in minutes and seconds, but about the accumulation of quiet choices that create a life worth watching. So lean in, hear the whistle, feel the track hum beneath your feet. The race of a lifetime is about to unfold. He was small when he first learned the language of distance. Not small in the sense of lacking, but compact, efficient, a body designed to listen to itself. As a boy he moved through the rural lanes, skipping stones across rivers and racing his friends to the town bakery. And in those unscripted sprints he discovered the elasticity of his legs and the stubborn discipline of play. His parents were steady people, not loud, but present, a mother who stitched with nimble fingers, and a father who kept a calendar in his head, noting harvests and birthdays with equal care. Weekends were for chores and neighborly visits, for listening to the radio die into static, and for learning that work was not punishment, but the price of staying present. School offered arithmetic and literature, But it was the young teacher who first encouraged him to try athletics, who clipped a number to his chest and said, in a voice that might have been curiosity or prophecy, "Go on. See what you can do." Early coaches were exacting, their words compact and utilitarian, but they were not unkind. They could see the way his stride lengthened when he thought of something else, how his arms settled into a quiet rhythm when he stopped thinking about winning. Training became a language. Sets, splits, tempo runs, and long runs that tasted of stone and salt. Days began early. The hollow dawn light, the hiss of bicycle tires, the soft thud of feet on country roads. Meals were economical. Whole grains, stewed fruit in winter, boiled potatoes that tasted of earth. There were austerities in that routine, yes, but also the richness of habit. He learned to find joy in repetitious things. The satisfying clack of spikes in the locker room. The ritual of tying shoelaces twice. The private check of posture in a mirror before stepping onto the track. As he matured into his late teens and early 20s, his talent became something that had to be negotiated with intelligence. He was not merely fast. He had instincts for the race itself, an uncanny sense of pace and timing. He could read a field, feel the ebb and flow of breath and intention around him, and make choices in the kinetic present. Teammates watched him with a mixture of admiration and competitive hunger. There were rivalries, crisp, public, and useful, that pushed him to refine his finishing kick, to practice surges on the bend until they felt like habit rather than panic. Yet for all the tactical acuity, there were quieter parts of his life that sustained him. An old record player that produced slow sonatas after late runs. The earnest debates with friends over the best route home. The letters he sent to a girlfriend that were more about small observations than grand declarations. In training, the work shifted from raw volume to surgical specificity. Long distances taught him patience. Intervals taught him pain management and the arithmetic of effort. Coaches mapped his body in spreadsheets of heart rate and recovery. He learned to respect the signals of fatigue, not to push through blindly, but to interpret them like a map legend. Injuries came as unwelcome teachers, a stress fracture that sidelined him for months, a hamstring niggle that turned the simplest stride into an interrogation. Those were the seasons where the mind mattered more than the legs. He sat through physiotherapy like a monk in study, learned to do silly-sounding exercises that built bridges of strength where there had been cracks, and read books on sports psychology until the letters in their margins turned familiar. There were also the political currents of his time, which could feel like windstorms changing the shape of a race. Competing in an era where sport and state were often entangled, he learned to be aware of the larger narratives without letting them rewrite his own. He moved through selection trials and national meets that had more at stake than personal glory, where the presence of cameras and protocols folded the human act of running into the machinery of representation. He grew adept at separating the purposeful from the performative, choosing to keep his focus on the lane in front of him and the immediate work of getting stronger, more patient, more precise. When the day arrived that would become the hinge of public memory, nothing about the stadium suggested transcendence. It was simply full. Faces in the stands, flags that fluttered like distant comets, ushers whispering across aisles. The race itself was a carved thing, 150 meters of geometry and will. Straub lined up, the number on his chest as ordinary as any paper. But the moments before the gun had the density of a held breath. He remembers later, in quieter retellings, the hum of the crowd as a kind of warm ocean, the faint cry of a vendor calling for last drinks, the deliberate control of his hands as they settled into the lane. At the crack of the gun, the 1,000 small rituals deferred to a single, unstoppable motion. The strike, the roll of hips, the economy of arms. He found his place in the pack and waited, patience honed into a precise instrument. Lap by lap the race unspooled. The leader's chest, then his, the field tightening like a fist. He ran as if listening to some inner metronome, a tempo that measured not only time but opportunity. In those final 300 meters when the world compresses and choices take on the clarity of survival, he made the decision that would define him. To follow a move, to bide, to sprint not out of fear, but out of conviction. The last straight was a crucible. He remembers the sound. Not the crowd, now a smear of color and noise, but the soft slap of his own feet and the ragged breathing of competitors. And then the shock of the finish line breaking like light. When the results flashed up, names sorted into order, He found himself in a place both strange and luminous. A medal hung heavy at his throat, the world full of new textures and new responsibilities. After the medal came the aftermath. Interviews that felt like a different kind of race. Formalities that required diplomacy. The sudden insistence of public expectation. But what mattered most was internal. The knowledge that the work had been honest. That the victory was not an accident, but the product of 1,000 small, stubborn decisions. In quiet moments afterwards, he would return to the track because it was where one met one's true self, where the only conversation worth having was with the rhythm of one's own legs. He continued to train, to lose, to triumph in smaller arenas, always carrying the medal not as a crown, but as evidence that the human body, when paired with a disciplined mind, can do remarkable things. Life continued beyond the stadium lights. He found solace in domestic routines, in friends who had witnessed not only the applause, but the long, ordinary hours of rehearsal. He coached briefly, sharing the granular truths he'd discovered: how to read a pack, how to build resilience, how to fall and stand again. He loved music still, and sometimes would sit by a window and listen to winter rain while sketching plans for a route he'd like to run when old enough to do so for pleasure, not speed. The public's attention ebbed as younger champions emerged, but in small towns and clubhouses, his name continued to be a compass, a thing people would mention in the same breath as determination. There were hard edges to the story, moments of doubt and loneliness that would have felled a lesser spirit. Illness, quiet betrayals, the slow abrasion of fame on private life. These were not mythic obstacles so much as human ones. In those times he learned to hold shame and pride the same way, as temporary states rather than identities. He nurtured friendships with those who saw him without the medal. Men and women who could say plainly, "You are more than one race." Those truths were perhaps the most nourishing of all. In the fullness of years, when younger athletes sought his counsel and cameras returned with curiosity, he spoke easily about the arithmetic of training, about pacing and patience, about the small daily labors that turn possibility into outcome. But he also spoke about wonder, the inexplicable pleasure of watching morning light spill across a track, the way a perfectly executed lap can feel like a sentence finally coming to an end. He urged the young to cultivate curiosity as much as discipline, to read widely, to befriend discomfort, and to remember that every finish line is a place to begin again. And so his life read like a race that never truly ends. Not because it demands endless striving, but because it invites continual return. There are images that refuse to fade: the bowed figure at the starting line, rain beating on a competitor's shoulders, a crowd that rises as one, and then is still. But what lingers most is not the medal or the record, but the shape of his resolve, modest, quiet, and inexorably forward. He did not conquer the track so much as belong to it, giving his best moments to a discipline that asks less for glory than for fidelity. His story is a reminder that greatness is often a sequence of obedient acts. Getting up, showing up, and giving the work honest time. For those who watch and learn, his life is an invitation. To train with respect, to fail with curiosity, to celebrate without vanity. To find the small rituals that anchor you when the world demands spectacle. Behind every finish line there is a life of repetition and refinement, of late-night doubts soothed by the simple knowledge that tomorrow's dawn brings another chance to run. If you are listening from the edge of your own ambition, let his story be a gentle command. Be patient, be relentless, and never confuse the noise of the crowd with the quiet work of the body and the character that guides it. If you felt this story, if it gave you a pulse of inspiration, then take a moment for the next simple act. Like, share, and subscribe to Behind the Medal, so more stories like this, of ordinary choices and extraordinary results, can find the light. Your support keeps these quiet lives in the public ear, reminding us that every medal has a behind, a journey worth listening to, and a lesson worth passing on.